This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent, Butterworth, and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience, and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, everyone. It's Dennis Berger, editor of SoundStage Access.
And Brent Butterworth, departing editor of SoundStage Solo.
Boo. We both, for now, at least as time of recording, write for the SoundStage Network, which is a collection of 9 microsites that cover all sorts of topics in audio.
From like super cheap things for, $50 to things for, maybe $500,000.
Yeah.
And a few things in between, too. Not just the extreme.
Yeah, we actually respect the middle.
Yeah.
So this week, we're going to be talking about what interests us right now going on in audio. And I want to start with Robert Harley's editorial from the February edition of The Absolute Sound.
Mm-hmm.
Harley's talking about something that gets under his goat a little bit. I think that's the term. Gets his goat, gets under
his goat. Gets under his skin or gets his goat.
It ticks him off. He is all
gets
hot and
under
bothered.
His goat's skin.
Yes, there we go.
Something.
It gets under his goat's skin. He is mad about speaker sensitivity ratings, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. I think we've got some things to say. What do you want to talk about this week, Brent?
I want to talk about there is an article or a review that's in Positive Feedback, which is an online used to be a published magazine. I don't think they publish it anymore, but
that's smart.
It is, well, look, it's the economics of magazine publishing, or that problem is well known. So I think they did have a magazine at one point, but they don't now, I assume. So there's an article by Robert Levy. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. The world premiere, the Zesto Audio Eros 500 Select Class A monoblocks. And there's a lot of things he talks about in this review. This looks like a lovely amplifier. Beautiful. I would love to own it. It's beautifully made. I've met this guy who designs them. I think he's got his act together, but a lot of the arguments made in this review do not stand the test of logic and critical thinking. And if there's one thing that the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast is about, it's logic and critical thinking.
Yes, sir.
At least we hope. Our striving, our constant struggle to achieve logic and critical thinking. Do we have, are we talking about anything else?
We are actually, we're talking to anything else. We're talking to someone else. We're going to bring our friend Geoffrey Morrison in. Geoffrey is taking over SoundStage Solo as of February 1st, I think. And we're going to talk to Geoff about his sort of plans for the site, what he's going to do differently, and what he's got coming up in terms of his first discussion, I think.
I'm looking forward to that. We
might go there. I don't know. It's, to be honest with you, dear listener, right now, we're going to bring our buddy Geoff in, and we're going to talk to him, and we're going to have some fun. And then we're going to say goodbye.
I guess we will.
Yeah, this season 1 grand finale of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast.
That.
Yes,
it kind of is. But there will be a season 2.
There will be. Yes, absolutely.
With some new stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think who's going to produce that season 2?
I'm going to produce it. I'm just not going to be on the mic. Yeah.
So it'll just be a burger production as opposed to a butter burger production.
It doesn't have quite the same ring, does it?
No.
Might have to come up with a better name. So
burger with cheese.
Maybe Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese. We'll see who the host ends up being. Then we'll see if the cheese thing is warranted.
Yeah.
So anyway, shall we segue into some intelligent discussion here?
Yeah, let's take the attention off of me and put it under Robert Harley, because he is his editorial in the new issue of The Absolute Sound, cover dated February 2023. Look,
it raises good questions. It raises some very important questions.
Yeah, I have to admit, I have a little bit of sympathy for Robert here, because we have all in the past had a deadline and thought, crap, what am I going to write about? Well, I might as well cause some outrage, right? Let's get some readers mad about something that maybe they don't really need to be mad about.
Well, it's a high-end audio publication. That's what that's their business model.
That is kind of their business model. But the article is titled Lies, Damn Lies, and Speaker Sensitivity Specs, brackets, with apologies to Mark Twain.
Okay.
What he's talking about here is that I think for quite some time, we all got used to the sensitivity rating of a speaker, which basically is just like, how loud can you expect the speaker to play given a standard input, right?
Mm-hmm.
We saw those rated as 1 watt at 1 meter. You fed a signal, 1 watt of power into a speaker. You measured it for 1 meter away. How many decibels were you getting, right? And that was your sensitivity rating.
Right.
Well, what Robert is angry about here is that he is more and more frequently seeing speakers rated not 1 watt, 1 meter, but 2.83 volts, 1 meter, which, as he rightly points out, 2.83 volts into 8 ohms is 1 watt, but not 4 ohms, right? So he's grumpy about this. And basically his complaint here is that it effectively makes the speaker appear more sensitive than, quote unquote, than it is, right? So what do you think about this, man?
Okay, so this article really made me think a lot, and it actually made me do something I've never done for the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, actually research the topic. And I researched it in the best possible means. So here's the thing. I've been doing speaker measurements since 1997, I think. And so much of what there's not a school for speaker measurements, sadly. There's not even really a definitive book on it. There are books that deal with it, but there's not one that's like, hey, you know what? Here's what people are doing. Here's what makes sense, blah, 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 things like that. So so many people that measure speakers just do, sort of best practices and what other people tell them that they're doing. And if you're a reviewer who measures speakers, you're going to have chats with people like, Andrew Jones and Paul Barton, and you're going to find out what they do, and you'll find out the things they do that are standardized and the things they do that are not standardized, that are just kind of common best practices, generally understood. And I have always just done my speaker measurements, my sensitivity measurements at 2.83 volts, okay, which is 1 watt for an 8 ohm load. Okay. Because as far as everybody else I ever talked to, and once you start doing measurements, you have a whole different discussion with speaker manufacturers. By the way, you have a much higher level of discussion, and which you cannot have that discussion if you don't do measurements, because you're not on the same level. So I just sort of assumed everyone was doing 2.83 volts. And I've seen that spec, a lot of times, people will say 1 watt, 1 meter. Sometimes they'll say 2.83 volts, 1 meter, whatever. So what I did was I called my old friend Vance Dickinson. Now, for those who don't know, Vance is the author of the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, which is I think has been printed, has gone through 7 editions and has been translated into, 8, 9, 10, a dozen languages. So it is kind of the definitive book. There's, by the way, new edition coming out pretty soon, which is substantially updated, because I know, because I kind of did some editing and chatting with him and stuff, and helped him out a little bit on it. A little bit. I mean, I helped. I did about 0.01% of the work on it. Because I'm a good sounding board for him, because I'm kind of out there doing different stuff than he does. Anyway, so Vance is that. Vance has designed speakers for umpteen zillion people. He's also done a couple of his own lines. He's worked for huge CE manufacturers. He's worked for little tiny speaker manufacturers and everybody in between. And he's also the editor of Voice Coil, which is the sort of trade and technical publication of the speaker industry. So he tests speaker drivers and all kinds of stuff in there, and there's all kind of technical discussion. And he is in my opinion, if you want to find an answer about speakers and get an honest, authoritative answer, you call Vance Dickinson. Okay, so unfortunately, he's a good friend of mine, and he was kind enough to kind of take me under his wing when I knew nothing about this stuff. And so, and by the way, he also used to be like the guy who taught speaker measurement for the LMS company that made like one of the first real good speaker measurement systems. So, I mean, he is just the master of this stuff. So I called him up. I explained the problem to him. And I said, look, Vance, everybody, I mean, so often we see it spec'd at 1 watt, 1 meter. But to my knowledge and in my experience, everybody does 2.83 volts. Mm-hmm. I said, is that right? Or are there people that do, a 4 ohm rating or whatever their speaker is whatever the impedance of their speaker. And, with a 4 ohm speaker, you would use a 2 volt signal. Okay. He said, look, basically the 1 watt thing was standardized decades ago. And it makes sense, or I will interject here for a second. It makes sense with headphones. Okay. Headphones are measured at 1 milliwatt. Mm-hmm. And the reason you do that is headphone impedance varies radically. You can have headphones that are 8 ohms. You can have headphones that are 800 ohms. Okay. With speakers, the nominal impedance is almost always between 4 and 8 ohms. And yes, there are speakers that go higher. There are speakers that go lower. And no speaker, except for like some Teals, has like a flat impedance curve. Okay, or I should say extremely few speakers have a flat impedance curve. So that speaker that's rated at 8 ohms probably goes up to, probably drops down to 6 at some point and probably goes up to 30 or 40 ohms at some point, right? So anyway, he said basically the old 1 watt standard is from decades ago and nobody does it. Everybody does 2.83 volts. He said you could do the 4 ohm thing if you wanted to, but he's completely unaware of anybody doing that. Yeah. Then you get into problems, and this is a problem where I think Robert Harley could have raised a fantastic point, which I will raise now, and that's that still speaker. Even if the whole industry said, okay, you know what, screw it, forget the 1 watt thing. We're just going to say 2.83 volts. And we're going to call it voltage sensitivity, which is exactly what it should be. Okay?
Yes. That's what an amplifier is giving you is controlled variable voltage, right?
Exactly.
So it makes sense. That is the primary thing that you're wanting an amplifier to give you is precise variable voltage. Yeah.
Here's the big problem is, and then I said to Vance, well, what does that really mean though? Is that at 1 kilohertz, or is that at, which of course, if you look at frequency response things, if you measure at 1 kilohertz, well, a speaker might have a big peak at 1 kilohertz, and all of a sudden it's got a higher sensitivity rating, or it might have a dip, or whatever. So it's kind of useless. Or there's kind of an industry standard. I think it's an actual industry standard, but I'm not sure. A guy named Mark Peterson, who used to do measurements for home theater and who did them for THX and stuff, kind of hipped me to this. And so often you talk to somebody in measurement and they say, oh, I do this. And you're like, that makes sense. I'll do that too. Mm-hmm. And so he averaged from 300 hertz to 3000 hertz, which is what I have continued on SoundStage Solo in the headphone sensitivity measurements, because I think it makes sense. That way a speaker that has like a giant bass hump doesn't get an extra rating, because what matters is, kind of the mid-range where your ear is most sensitive, right? Yeah. So 3K to 300 hertz to 3K makes a lot of sense to me. But, Vance pointed out to me, he said, well, I measured a Beats speaker once, a Beats, Bluetooth speaker. Mm-hmm. And he said, the treble was 15 dB hotter than the bass.
Wow.
He didn't remember which one it was, but I know because it was the Beats pill, because I measured it too. And it was so bad that a competing manufacturer called me up one day and said, hey, have you heard the Beats pill yet? I said, no. And he happened to live in the LA area. He says, I'm bringing it over right now. You have to hear this thing.
Oh, wow. This is sort of the thing like where you eat something disgusting and you're like, you got to try this.
And he brought it over and I ran a measurement. I listened to it. I'm like, oh my God. You think of Beats as being like colossal bass. This thing had no bass at all, like nothing. I have 1-inch drivers, But anyway, I don't know who voiced it. Not Dr. Dre. No. Anyway, so he said, if you've got if the treble is 15 dB hotter than the bass, what do you call the sensitivity of that product?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, so sensitivity ratings are, if you look at what I do on SoundStage Solo, at least the rating is all entirely explained about how I do that. Okay.
Right.
I say it's, the rated, the sensitivity, calculated for the rated impedance of 32 ohms or whatever is X for 1 milliwatt, average from 300 to 3K. Okay.
And I think it's safe to say, like, that is very important in your measurements for Solo specifically, because people want to know, am I going to be able to drive this thing with a smartphone, portable music player, or a smartphone, or, the headphone output on my laptop, things like that. Yeah,
exactly. So speaker manufacturers should do this. There's absolutely no reason for them not to do it. And then there's another problem is, like, some people rate their speakers for anechoic sensitivity, which is sort of the quote unquote right way to do it, because that's repeatable and defined, especially if you're 300 to 3K, because then, anechoic chambers are not perfect below a certain frequency, right? Unless they are humongous, which only a few are.
Right.
So they have a correction curve on the anechoic chamber, even like the ones at Harman and places, Samsung and places like that. But, but within 300 to 3K, that's really easy to do. You could even do that in a room that's just covered with a lot of insulation and stuff. You don't need anything. Or you could just do it out in your backyard. Yeah. And it's very, very simple to do, and it's very repeatable. However, it's not real world, because when you bring that speaker into a room, it's going to play louder because it gets reinforcement from the room. So a lot of people will say, in-room sensitivity and call it 3 dB more. Yeah. But they don't usually define how they got to in-room sensitivity. They actually measured in a room, and what room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
This just goes on. The variables just go on kind of forever here. And it is a big problem with speaker sensitivity measurements, although I will say, usually I find speaker sensitivity measurements aren't too far off.
Yeah.
Now, can I address something else in this? Or I know I'm rambling here, but
I wanted to address
really
something real quick.
Okay,
let me jump in and then you go, because you've ranted for a while.
I'm running out of breath.
Yeah, go breathe. So there's a little subhead that he's got here that says the spec is technically accurate but misleading out of context. Brent, let me interview you for a moment.
Okay. Yes.
Have you ever, in the entirety of your time working in consumer electronics, found a specification that was not misleading out of context? Like, all specifications are misleading out of context, right?
Well, that's a good point. That is I didn't think about that, but that's a very good point. And specs are often, quoted. Specs are very often quoted in a misleading way. It's very common. I mean, you can say that your speakers, I've seen how many speakers that are just complete pieces of junk, and they say, oh, it's flat from 20 to 20K.
Yeah.
You're like, no, it's not. But maybe they found some way to measure that to where it is flat. And then you would, or just, it's sort of like audio video receiver power measurements, right? Well, you can do things like just measure one channel at, say, 6 ohms to get the maximum possible output measurement out of there. You might get 180 watts or something out of a receiver, but then when you measure it with all channels driven, you drop down to 30 watts a channel.
Yeah, because you you still got to have a power supply. You've got to supply the thing, and that's the limiting function of it.
And believe me, manufacturers don't. Well, I think there are some manufacturers who like the fact that they can publish misleading specs, but I've had so many manufacturers tell me when I've said, "Hey, man, your specs are misleading," they're like, "Well, yeah, but my competitor publishes the same spec, and his specs are misleading, and he's making a soundbar that he rates at 1,000 watts that has a 40-watt power supply."
Wow.
And so, and the manufacturer's like, "I'd like to be honest, but I have to compete."
Right.
So it's a big, giant problem. And here is, I think, one possible solution to the problem is reviewers have to dig deeper and start to really understand this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you dig deeper is by doing measurements and then by reading the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook. Okay, you will learn.
I've read. I gotta admit, man, I struggle so hard with that book. I read it and I'm like, I think I understand what I just read. I really don't understand what I just read.
Well, it's heavy duty. It is very heavy duty. And however, the first time I read it, I've been doing speaker measurements for, I think I kind of just started doing speaker measurements. Oh no, wait, whoa. No, I had not yet started. And that's how, and I bought it thinking like, I really should learn more about this stuff. And that's how I got to know Vance, because Vance was designing speakers for Atlantic Technology. And I mentioned to Peter Tribeman at Atlantic Technology that, I just read this book and it was just illuminating. It's like, I understand how crossovers work now. And Peter said, oh, well, he does stuff for us. I'll introduce you.
Oh, cool.
I was like, oh, okay. And Vance also just turns out to be the coolest guy ever. So, all right. I need to recharge for a sec because I have something else I want to. Did I fully answer your question?
Yeah, it was kind of a joke question anyway. It was just simply like, have you ever seen a specification that had not been used in a misleading manner? I mean, it's all of these specifications are used misleadingly, but also on their own terms. They don't really mean much until you combine them. Like, we talk about the difference between measuring with 2.83 volts and 1 watt. Well, the reality is that 1 watt is calculated by, the voltage times the impedance, or the voltage and the impedance. You got to take all of that into consideration. Yeah. So 2.83 volts is the consistent thing. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling too. But
exactly, it's voltage sensitivity is what we're measuring, even if we don't say we're measuring that.
Yes, we
are not measuring power sensitivity, which is watts. Okay, now here is one of the two paragraphs I have a big problem with in this article. This isn't to say that you should. I'm quoting. This isn't to say that you should avoid 4-ohm speakers where sensitivity is measured with a drive signal of 2.83 volts. Only that you should subtract 3 dB from the sensitivity spec to find the speaker's true sensitivity to compare it with speakers measured without the 4-ohm 2.83 volt trick.
It's not a trick. It's not a trick.
It's not a trick. Man.
Yeah.
Okay, because now, Dennis, if you put a 2.83 volt signal, this is my technical quiz for you. On the spot, pop quiz.
I'm never good at these.
You're in big trouble. If you measure an 8-ohm speaker with a 2.83 volt signal, and it puts out 90 dB at 1 meter, okay? And then you measure a 4-ohm speaker with 2.83 volts, and it puts out 90 dB. Which one's louder?
Well, what weighs more, a ton of lead or a ton of feathers?
Exactly. No, this is wrong. You should not subtract, as he says, you should subtract 3 dB from the sensitivity spec. Yeah. No, you should not, because your amp is putting out 2.83 volts. If you turn your amp's volume up to 10 o'clock or something, maybe it's going to put out 2 volts, 3 volts, 5 volts, whatever. It's going to put out whatever that is. It's going to put that out into a 4-ohm speaker or an 8-ohm speaker and give you the same volume, provided that your amp can deliver enough current to the 4-ohm speaker, which at 1 watt, it can. Even a really crappy amp probably can do that. Now,
those little Altoids amps could do that. Yeah,
So, if you're really cranking, right? If you're playing your system at 105 dB or something like that, yes, the amp might not be able to put out 4 ohms. You might lose some bass response. The amp might shut down. It might distort. Something bad's going to happen. However, at a normal listening level, you put that volume setting at 10 o'clock, it's going to give you, with 2 speakers that are rated the same, no matter what the impedance of the speaker is, it's going to give you the same output level. The same.
Yeah.
Okay. That's one problem I have with this article. And I guess it's kind of understandable in a way, is if you look at the power sensitivity, which we've already agreed doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Then yes, it should be knocked down 3 dB. Okay. Just like if you measured the 4-ohm speaker with the 4-ohm speaker, a 1-watt signal is 2 volts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you reduce your signal level to 2 volts, which means turning your volume down on your preamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a 3 dB lower sensitivity spec. However, it doesn't matter, because what you're looking for is how loud does this thing play when I turn my amp up to 6 or something, right? And that it's voltage sensitivity. The industry needs to kind of correct this. It doesn't need to kind of correct it. It needs to correct it. And one thing that you could do is you could have reviewers who understand these things, who do measurements, who understand this stuff. And fortunately, there is a new crop of reviewers, and let's say Aaron at Aaron's Audio Corner, who are digging deep into this stuff and explaining it. And I hope we'll get more, more active and more influential, and we'll start to push the industry to really get their act together.
Yeah.
And this is easy for speaker manufacturers to do, because you're doing the measurement. You understand the parameters of the measurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as you as the speaker manufacturer, you understand the parameters of the measurement. Maybe the marketing guy doesn't, but certainly the engineers do. And the engineers could just say, hey, look, let's put a full spec in there so that we look good. Okay? Because believe me, you look way better to an audio enthusiast if you have specs in there that actually explain things as opposed to obfuscate. You look good. That's a good marketing spin there, to have like real specs.
Yeah.
And by the way, put your crossover point in there and put what your crossover slopes are, because even if the person reading it doesn't understand what that is or even the implications of it, you look smarter. So I just really think the whole industry is not only is not, as Robert Harley says, is not only misleading the public. It's not necessarily misleading the public. It's just not giving the full story. And there's no reason why it couldn't give the full story. Now, I have another problem with this article. Do you know can you speculate as to what it might be?
No, I can't, because I never know what's going to send you into a dizzy. I'll tell you what bothers me, though, when he's talking about this, when he's talking about like the score's dynamic markings, when he's, triple forte may be reproduced as double forte. And I was just like, well, you're just making stuff up there, man. He's talking about the driver's voice coil heating up its electrical resistance and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, none of that is really, you're like, give me an actual example of when you've been listening to a speaker and you've heard that happen because of this problem that you're ranting about. And
that would spoil the whole business model of high-end audio. Actually providing real world examples of something you're talking about.
Oh, anyway, what got under
it's
your
actually the
skin?
Same. It's the same thing. But
Okay.
There's two aspects to it. He's talking about as a driver's voice coil heats up, its electrical resistance increases. Yep. Reducing current flow, compressing dynamics. Yep. And maybe even burning out the voice coil, or who knows what. However, he's acting as if, and this is the old trope of, in that same paragraph before there, I'm trying to find where he talks about how. Here's the quote. It's not that low sensitivity speakers can't sound dynamic and lifelike, only that these qualities seem to come more easily and universally to high sensitivity designs, in my experience. Now, as an audio writer, if I hear something and I think, I think I'm hearing this, I don't go, well, that's it. That's what I'm hearing. All readers, this is the fact. I heard it, therefore it is a fact, and you should base all your buying decisions on this. What I do is I try to confirm it. I go like, well, let me go pull up some panelists in and let them listen to this and see if they think the same thing. Or maybe I run some measurements, or maybe I call Vance Dickinson or Andrew Jones or Paul Barton or who knows who, right? And I try to confirm it if I was actually reviewing like high-end speakers, which I'm not, but I would say like, hey, you know what? Here's 2 speakers that are high sensitivity, that are like 94, 95, something like that. Let's compare those to 2 speakers that are low sensitivity, like 85 dB, right? Put them with the same amp, get a good 200 watt amp, so nothing's getting compressed or anything.
Right.
And see which ones people prefer.
Yeah.
And then
or more importantly,
test,
sit next to one of these high-end guys and go, which of those is the low sensitivity?
Well, that would be awesome.
Speaker?
That ain't going to happen. But so, and even do it. You can even do it with like, you could even go, hey man, and this would be a great article for any high-end audio magazine to do if they're courageous enough, which they're not. But SoundStage would do it. Doug should do this. Doug and Jeff should do this. Yeah. Doug and Jeff, I know you're listening. Do this. You could get, like a 10 or 15 watt single-ended triode tube amp with some really sensitive speakers, and get like a couple of those and a couple of really sensitive speakers, and they get some 200 watt, Dan D'Agostino thing or something like that, and plug that into some 85 dB sensitivity speakers. You have to get a couple different ones, because the things that make you prefer a speaker are frequency response, and also frequency response and frequency response.
Well, also, off-axis performance,
which is frequency response. So,
well, yeah, okay,
but frequency response, that whole thing wrapped up into frequency response. Okay. That's what matters. The sensitivity does not matter, and the sense of ease or blah 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 something. Yeah, fine. Confirm it in a blind test, then I'll take it seriously. But you could do a really good article on this. And hey, man, if it comes out that the speakers that are more sensitive do have a greater dynamic something or another, then great. Then you're confirmed. Then you can say, hey, man, we tried this, and this is the result we got. And people, and here's our methodology, and people are free to try the same experiment and report if they got a different result, or some AES guy can go, hey, I tried this and blah blah something, and then you're providing useful information for people. I'd love to know the results of that test. I'd love to do that test. I would do that test if I had I don't have any of that gear sitting around, but hey, man, maybe there'll be a point in my life when I do, and I will do that. But Doug and Jeff, do this. Please do this. This would be awesome. So
this would be awesome. Yeah.
Anyway.
And the thing is, I kind of don't care what the answer is, right?
I don't either. I don't care.
I just want to know the answer, right?
I have not weighed in on, all I've said is frequency response is what matters, and it's still going to matter way more than any of this other stuff. But hey, this might matter kind of a little bit. I don't know. But also, he talks about how, the speakers, you get all this heating up of the voice coil and things like that, as if all things were equal, and the more sensitive speaker had the same voice coil, which it does not. Okay, typically speaking. Now, there's 2 different ways to get power. You can make a like with subwoofers, you have like these big giants. With most subwoofers nowadays, you have a pretty big driver. Maybe you have a big box. You have a big surround that lets that subwoofer driver move back and forth a half an inch or an inch or who knows how far. Big, fat, tough surround that's hard to move back and forward. And if you go to like an SVS subwoofer, right, and you try to push that driver in, there's going to be a lot of resistance, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you got to throw 1,000 watts at it. But if you want powerful, deep bass that's not in a big box, that's the only way to do it. Now, you can also increase sensitivity. You can also get a lot of output. You can use a weaker amp, but also like reduce the mass of your driver. So you can use a thinner cone. And if you have a lot of money, you can use beryllium, which is really light and really stiff, but you probably don't have a lot of money. So you got to use, I don't know, maybe paper. Okay. Paper is light, and paper is a great cone material. And you can't put one of these surrounds on there that has the big giant half roll that's made of rubber or whatever. You got to put like the little pleated paper surround that's doped around the edge, which is you see on a lot of professional PA speakers and things like that, and also on speakers that are on like some of the JBL like Everest and things like that. They'll use a surround like that because it's just they've got a big giant woofer on those speakers, and and they've got a big cabinet, and so they can do a higher efficiency sort of thing. And also they're using horns, which they want to make the whole thing more efficient. So the woofer has to catch up to the sensitivity of the tweeter, which is always going to be more sensitive. Almost always. So, but however, you're going to have problems with that. That driver is going to distort more easily. It's going to have a lighter voice coil, all right, which might saturate more easily with 100 watts than the voice coil that's on that big woofer that's got a big, massive, fat, giant voice coil, which you can throw 1,000 watts into, right? But so you're getting lower mass on that, but it's to compare the two is ridiculous. So in other words, if I use, really fat gauge wire, and you've got a big giant coil on there that can take a lot of power, it's not going to have a lot of dynamic compression. Whereas you try to put a lot of power into a voice coil that's on one of these high efficiency drivers, high sensitivity drivers, either way. I know they're not interchangeable for all those technical people out there, but for this purpose, they're kind of interchangeable. Anyway,
I was about to say, we're going to be getting a very angry text from Sandy Gross.
Right. I know. But for this purpose, it doesn't matter. But those are going to heat up a lot faster and have a lot more dynamic compression at very low power levels. Okay, so everything is not the same. And also, as I think it was Ken Cantor, who was one of the co-founders of NHT, told me like 30 years ago when I talked to him about this problem, he said, you got to realize that, there's no free lunch. And it's not like people that make, Harley's article kind of implies that people that make, low sensitivity speakers are just stupid. Why don't they make high sensitivity speakers? Because those have so much more, those are so much more dynamic and lifelike. He's not saying that, but isn't he kind of implying it?
He's kind of
How could they be
that,
so unwise as just to not make all their speakers 94, 95, hell, 100 dB sensitivity? But the fact...
he's kind of saying if they did so, they wouldn't have to resort to this sort of chicanery.
Right, exactly. And so as Ken Cantor told me, he said, when you get higher, there's no free lunch. When you get higher sensitivity, you're compromising something else. And it might be linearity in terms of the frequency response of it. It might be distortion. It might be all sorts of things, but there's no free lunch. Okay. Yeah. So can we wrap this thing up? I'm tired of ranting.
Absolutely, because I know you're really not going to have anything to rant about with our next topic, which is the most important and telling piece of equipment in your system.
Indeed.
Or something. That is a direct quote. So, let's
wait. Whoa. Oh, man, I missed that. Oh, my God. Am I going to rant? Oh, my God. Prepare, people. I'm going to rant.
As the snowman would say, hang on to your ass, Fred. We'll be right back.
And we're back. This is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Brent Butterworth.
And I am Dennis Berger, and I'm really upset with you, Brent Butterworth.
Why?
I just dropped a high-quality Smokey the Bandit reference on you, and you didn't even get it.
What was it?
Snowman. Hold on to your ass, Fred.
I never saw that movie.
Oh, my gosh. How are we even friends?
It's a Southern thing. Right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
My whole impression of Burt Reynolds is basically the Norm Macdonald impression of Burt Reynolds.
That's actually that's a pretty good impression. I have to say.
So
anyway, what are we talking about this segment, man?
Round 2 is going to be.
Yeah, ding, ding.
This is in positive feedback. You can go, it's positive-feedback.com. Go check it out. A lot of high-end audio reviews on there. This is the world premiere review of the Zesto Audio Eros 500 Select Class A monoblocks. Now, you should go look at these things. Zesto Audio is Zesto Audio. This company really has great. I mean, so many high-end audio products are kind of plain black boxes, or they're, $5,000 worth of aluminum wrapped all around them with not a lot of thought put into the design. These are beautifully designed. There's some serious industrial design that goes into these. It's actually a mirror imaged pair of monoblocks. It's not just two of the same things. It really looks nice.
This really cool wave pattern that is just like, even in like the cooling vents, like the ventilation have this sort of wave pattern into the ventilation. That's just, it's a recurring theme that's just really, really gorgeous. And the case for the amp itself even has a wave element to it.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to go buy an expensive amp and you want something that looks awesome, this would be on your short list by far.
How much is this thing?
I'm scrolling down to the end to try to find what's the long review. $35,000. I assume that's for a pair. That actually doesn't seem unreasonable given what it is. And there are 6 KT88s, and they're running in Class A, rated at 250 watts per side.
Boy, if you're going to make a $35,000 pair of amps, they better look like this.
If I had $35,000 to spend on amps, man, I got to tell you, there's a lot of amps where I look at it, it's like, I don't know, it's $40,000 or $50,000. I'm like, really? And I know it's like, I know what it costs to make these things, and I know there's so much thought, there's so much money in the metalwork and stuff. But with these, I look at this and go like, man, these are really cool. And this is one of the few high-end audio products where people would walk into your house and go like, what's that? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm
assuming that you then must agree with Robert Levy's introductory sentence, which let me just read it.
Okay.
Let me quote it directly. The more I immerse myself in this hobby since I retired from the entertainment industry in 2008, the more certain I have become that the amplifier is the most important and telling piece of equipment in your system.
Okay,
true or false?
Can I? All right. Before I do that, can I just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a long review. I'm not going to scroll down to. I probably agree with his conclusion that these are delightful amps. That like almost every high-end audio review concludes, hey, this is a beautiful product, and if you're looking for something in this price range, you should consider this. Okay. I mean, how many high-end audio reviews don't end like that? So safe assumption. But I have problems with this. I mean, you can look into, we were talking about, logic and critical thinking. And he says the next sentence is, it was in the late 1970s that J. Gordon Holt stated in Stereophile that one should buy a very good speaker that fits your needs and then bust your budget on an excellent amplifier. All right, Dennis Berger, from a standpoint of logical fallacies, what is the logical fallacy in that sentence?
Oh, crap. Oh, man. I don't have
It's one that I've written about a lot.
I don't have the list memorized the way you do.
Okay.
I recognize
it's an appeal. It's an appeal to authority.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. J. Gordon Holt he's passed away a long time ago, was this really brilliant, smart audio expert. And he said this, so it must be true. This is a problem. All right. J. Gordon Holt. I am an incredibly fortunate person, and that I knew J. Gordon Holt. I was not merely acquainted with him. I was at a Stereophile show. I think I was at some dinner. Maybe it was like B&W had a dinner. It was in Miami. And, it was one of those shows where like everybody's staying at the show's at the hotel, and everybody's mostly staying at the hotel. And I ended up sitting next to Gordon at dinner with B&W. I'd never met him, and I'd been reading Stereophile for a few years, and I was just really loved it. And of course, he had already sold it by then. He was still doing occasional reviews for them, and he was still kind of a bit of an eminence grise, a guiding light to some extent. Now, because he, along with Harry Pearson, are really the guys who kind of invented high-end audio publishing. So anyway, Gordon and I kind of struck up a conversation, and he said, hey, you want to go hit the bar and continue this conversation? I'm like, yeah. And so those who know Gordon know that he was a champion of drinking and smoking, and as am I. And we sat and drank bourbon or scotch or whatever, and we closed the place down. I think it was
Wow.
midnight or 1 a.m. And finally they ran us out of there. We just talked. It was awesome.
I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for
because
that.
Gordon, so much of my attitude about audio reviewing comes from reading Gordon. And I found him to be a very curious person. I found him to be someone who was usually, not always, usually doubted his own conclusions. And he was a real searcher, as opposed to some of the people in the audio biz who are like, well, I believe this and therefore it's true. And he wasn't like that. However, some of the stuff he said, now granted, he was back in the really, really early days before we had any real science on this stuff. And so he, like so many other people, like Julian Hirsch at Stereo Review and lots of other people, were trying to find the answers on their own with limited resources, very limited measurement capability, if any, and just fumbling around in the dark to try to find the answers. But Gordon was wrong about that. He was right about a lot of things.
Yeah.
He was wrong about that, because I'll tell you what you already know. Should I tell you, or should I pull it out of you through questioning?
Oh boy, just tell me.
Okay.
We gotta get this thing wrapped up, man. We got Jeff coming on soon.
Here's the thing. You can blind test speakers. Anybody can tell speakers apart in a blind test. There are huge, easily observable differences. This is all confirmed through science. In amplifiers, if you do a blind test with two of them that match levels used within their limitations, not running not running a 30-watt amp at 100 watts or something, then if you do a blind test, people will not be able to tell them apart. There are, I think, occasionally people have. There are, if you go through all the AES papers, you will find a couple of little things here and there of where people were able to tell some things apart.
Well, let me ask you this. Toward the end of the review, he says, and I quote, I'll quote again, with 250 watts of Class A power at the ready, they sound like 500-watt amps. Now, other than giving you, 3 dB of additional gain, how could a 500-watt possibly sound different than a 250-watt amp? I mean, and taking into consideration that the only way that sentence is meaningful is if you've got a load attached to it, right? It's like, what does that even mean? How does a 500-watt amp sound like anything as compared with a 250-watt amp, right? Do you have any sense of what he's even trying to convey? I mean, we both know that's garbage, but what is he trying to say?
I guess he's trying to say that they sound, what was the phrase Robert Harley used in the last segment? Because we're professionals, so we refer back to the last segment for entertainment value.
What did he say?
He said,
the fortissimo, the triple fortissimo versus double fortissimo or something. I don't know.
Something. It's more effortless and more something or another, whatever. So, but that's a good point. I'm just like, what does a 500-watt amp sound like? I mean, you can go buy 500-watt PA amps that are Class D and weigh like 8 pounds, but they're designed for PAs, and they're designed to have like just colossal amounts of power to drive some giant PA speaker at extremely loud levels without much concern for sound quality, even though they probably for the most part work fine. Is that what a 500-watt amp sounds like? I don't know. And they have 1,000-watt ones. Is 1,000 watts better than 500?
Here's what I'm guessing. I'm guessing someone at Positive Feedback decided, hey, guys, we can no longer use the phrase, it would be of value at twice the price. So everybody's scrambling to figure out, okay, how do I say the same thing? Right? So I don't know. I'm speculating, but to me, that's just the only thing that makes sense. Like, what does it mean? What could it mean? I don't know.
It's just here's the thing. It's like, boy, there ought to be kind of a school for, high-end audio reviewers, like a certification program. Like in Europe, they have the Tonmeister thing where they have to do, I don't know, something or another, like identify something and actually know things. But anybody can, and Robert Levy has, if I recall correctly, he's the president of the Los Angeles and Orange County Audiophile Group. And I know he's been listening to this stuff for a decade, but you don't, just like, I've been driving cars for, how long? God, 4 decades now, more. And I am not I've spent thousands upon thousands of hours. I've got my 10,000 hours in the car probably by now. Does this make me a good driver? No. Does it make me understand anything about cars? No. I mean, my mom's got thousands of hours of driving in the car. Could she tell you how a motor even works? No. I mean, it doesn't, having passively experienced this stuff without having dug in and tried to learn as much as you possibly can about it. If you do that, you will forever be an amateur. Just like I am an amateur driver.
Right. Let's talk about why that matters, because I think there's a danger in us sounding elitist here, right? And saying, well, you should know the science fundamentals. But really, for me, what it boils down to is we are ultimately, hopefully, trying to help people make more informed purchasing decisions. And that is true whether they are shopping for an $800 integrated amplifier or $35,000 monoblocks, right? It's I get accused a lot of not seeing the value in very high priced components, which is not true. I just think we should be honest about where the value proposition lies, right? And so, we talked a lot about the Zesto Audio Eros 500. I think you and I have been honest about at least where we think the value proposition lies. It's not, nobody's saying these amps aren't worth $35,000. Yeah.
And if you want to
think like, if we had $35,000, here's why we would be willing to spend $35,000 on these amps. But
and these tube amps, look, I mean, these things have 6 KT 150s in there. I mean, there aren't a lot of tube amps that'll deliver just awesome power like I assume this thing will. So this thing's probably got a lot of kick to it. You could put this into some full range speakers with 15-inch woofers or God knows what, and it would probably sound way better than most tube amps and better than a lot of solid state amps. So,
well, yeah, I mean, who really needs 250 watts per channel? Almost nobody.
Well, who needs 500 horsepower in a car?
Exactly.
But you might want it. You might want it. That's fine.
Yes.
Knock yourself out.
Yes. And there is nothing wrong with wanting it. Pretty much, I guarantee you could hook almost any speaker to this amplifier, except for maybe, what were those old Apogees?
Those 2 ohm things.
That were we got down to like 1 ohm at some point.
Yeah, they were brutal. They blew up a lot of amps.
Maybe I wouldn't hook those gigantic Apogees to this thing, but they don't sell those anymore. No. So just about any speaker that you could go out and buy, you could confidently hook to this amplifier and not have a problem
which you can't say of all
tube
amps.
Correct. So there's value in that. There is value in not having to really think about specifications. There's value in going, no matter what speaker might make my heart sing, I could hook to this amp and it would just work. I think really for people who can afford to spend $35,000 on an amp, that probably means more to them than anything. Just that, I don't have to care about it. I can just buy whatever the heck I want and hook it up and it's going to work. There is value in that. So, but let's just be honest about where the value proposition lies.
Exactly. And I think our message is in certain ways anti-elitist, because any schmo can go read Floyd Toole's book, go get the loudspeaker design cookbook. And I'm not going to say you're going to understand everything in there, but just let it wash over you. You'll learn something. You'll learn a lot. And, maybe there's a couple other good books you can read. Go read about this stuff and learn, which you're just not going to get on audio forums, and you're not going to get on, not that you can't learn anything from audio forums, but they're very up and down. And you can, audio publications for the most part don't dig into this. And I will always make an exception for John Atkinson's Measurements in Stereophile. You read those things, you're going to learn a lot. and he writes clearly, which most of the stuff is not written very well. So Floyd's stuff is written beautifully too. So there's a lot of stuff that's reasonably well strung together. And actually Vance's stuff is pretty clear, just that it's super technical. So anyway, any schmo, you do not have to be a refined man of culture who's been listening to classical music for 50 years or whatever to appreciate good audio gear, or to select good audio gear, or to judge good audio gear, or to understand audio gear. You do not have to be that at all. You have to go amass the knowledge. It's just, and you know what? You can do that in 6 months.
If you want to influence what other people are purchasing, right?
If you know, and you can do that in 6 months. It's very anti-elitist. It just means it takes work, as opposed to sitting around in your underwear listening to, Wagner on tube amps.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think it is about time for us to take a break.
It's Jeff time.
Because I think it is about time for our buddy Jeff to call in. So let's go grab some water. Let's go powder our noses and listen to some music.
Cool.
And we will be right back. And welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Dennis Berger.
I'm Brent Butterworth.
And we've got somebody new here with us.
I am Jeff Morrison.
Awesome.
It's true, you are. Yeah, so in this segment, we are basically going to be introducing you to the SoundStage family as a whole. Jeff, I know you've already been doing some reviews and stuff for SoundStage Solo, but you are now going to be taking it over.
Yes.
As Brent leaves us for more corporate pastures.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Way to sell out, Brent.
Unless, fewer nights spent measuring headphones.
How dare you want things like healthcare and a retirement plan?
I know I should be sacrificing my entire life for the audio industry, but oh well. So Jeff, I recommended you for this job,
You did.
And
I recommended you for the job that you're now taking full time.
True. But so good. All right. So we don't owe each other anything. So this is a completely honest, frank
It might
discussion.
be a slightly amusing thing for the listeners, or at least to me, of like how often you and I have done that over the last 20 years. Of
it's
like
a few times.
We didn't have an overlap at home theater, but then you were editor at Home Entertainment, and then you left Home Entertainment to be freelance and recommended me to be the new editor there, which I did. And then I think,
it was just me and you.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, that was, and it was for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And then
with a lot of pseudonyms.
What? No. Honestly, I think this might be the first time that's ever been like put anywhere in public, that we had been doing that to make it look like that we had more writers than we did. But
really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. The reputation of that magazine is sullied now.
Hey, that was it. The way I described that period of my life is like, that was an amazing. The first year was amazing. The second year was difficult. And then the third year was just torture. Cause that was, well, anyway, that's a different story, but then I think maybe, did you recommend me to do stuff with Sound and Vision at that point? Or did that just happen?
I did
like
because I was doing projectors, and as soon as you became available, I called up Al Griffin, who was at the time, senior editor of Sound and Vision. And I said, look,
right.
how about if Jeff takes over doing, because I was only doing it as a favor to Al. Al asked me to do it, and I said, well, okay. And I was borrowing your measurement gear anyway.
Yeah.
And so I called up Al and said, hey, you know what? Jeff is like infinitely better at reviewing projectors than me. Why don't you give this to Jeff? Because you were coming off of that job at Home Entertainment, and I was like, well, I hate doing this. Jeff likes doing this. He's good at it, and he needs a gig. So, but bam. Yeah. But it turned into being we ended up doing a blog together at Sound and Vision, which
that was
I
fun.
think
That was a good time.
Actually, that was for both of us. That was our finest hour. I just have to say
we did it. That was a lot of fun because they just kind of let us just run wild, and we had a good time with that.
They barely paid any attention to it. We had
they paid well. It was like I could spend a week writing a thing, and
it was super creative, and we collaborated, and we only lived a few miles apart at the time. So and we were on the same junkets all the time.
Yeah.
So we were just constantly. But anyway, so now the latest gig that we have exchanged is editor of SoundStage Solo.
Yes. Well, no, you're skipping one very important step, which was shortly after the Sound of Vision thing. I started working with Wirecutter. And
that's right.
I was one of the first people. I was one of the first wire cutters. And still, at the moment, the oldest wire cutter, because everyone else who was hired around that time has now either quit or
the longest
bought out, sold out, whatever.
The longest serving wire cutter writer, the oldest person at wire cutter.
That's
Brent Butterworth.
Yes, fair.
Senior staff writer.
Correct.
Of the 200 some odd people.
And that's exactly the point. When I started, it was like Brian, me, and like 3 other people.
Yeah.
And then slowly, as we were ramping up, I was able to bring in, and so I was able to hire people like Lauren, like you. And around that time, Brian, he just let anybody, like he trusted my judgment on when it came to hiring. So if I was just like, hey, we need this person, he's like, yeah, okay, let's do it.
Well, that explains how I got it.
And then there's this guy, Dennis. But then as that has kind of expanded more and more, for various reasons that, would be a podcast in and of itself, has stepped back from that, and they started hiring more people full time with the New York Times stuff. And then that brings us to where you are now.
Now we're at SoundStage Solo.
Yes.
Where you take over my role as editor-in-chief.
Yes.
And I have so many questions for you.
Okay.
Number one being every editor. Look, you and I have both been editor-in-chief of multiple things.
That's true.
Every editor comes in and looks at what the old editor does and goes like, yeah, that kind of sucked. I'm going to fix that. So what are the things that I did that sucked that you're going to fix?
I mean, I think really we need to focus on
offense taken,
more Apple products, I think. And obviously AirPods are the best headphones on Earth.
Best.
So really, do we need to review anything other than Apple products?
I totally dropped the ball on Apple.
And what are these measurements? I mean, that's just too much information. You just have so many words and graphs. I mean, come on. What is this? Math? Come on.
It's really pedantic and boring, and nobody should care about that. You're right. It's going to be better. Well, I'll tell you this much: as an editor-in-chief, who I feel can objectively, look at maybe his own work, but certainly everybody else's, I will say your writing is fantastic. And
thank you, sir.
Has been I've watched you grow as a writer, and when I first met you, it was like every sentence was its own paragraph.
I actually remember the first time we met. Do you remember the first time we met?
Yeah, so we met when you were at Home Theater, and I was with Dolby, and you came in, and I think maybe Mike Wood, who I think maybe was your boss
that over
at the time?
Like Burbank with John Kellogg?
It was in Burbank, and probably John was there. John Kellogg from formerly Dolby was there, I think. And it was at, I think it was called Future Disc. It was a mastering studio, really awesome mastering studio where all of Motley Crue's albums were mastered.
I still remember that because that was one of the first, one of the first important things I needed to do for home theater, and I was late.
Of course. And
it happened before noon. Of course, I was late.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's where I first met you. Anyway, so
you're right.
So tell me more about what your plans are for SoundStage Solo. Do you have? Am I putting you on the spot here?
No. I mean, because obviously I've been giving it a lot of thought, and I've already written my like greetings intro column kind of thing where I talk about this, and depending on when the podcast goes up, that might already be live. And basically, I kind of praise you, of course, being the the elder statesman of the audio world.
Yes.
Of like,
I was going to say silverback.
yeah. Oh, that works too. I mean, he is the Brent Butterworth. So, but my overall thought of it is like, this is something that you have done a really good job building up and kind of creating an audience for. And I actually kind of feel opposite of what you were saying, is like, I don't really think there's any reason to just stir the pot just to stir the pot. Or rock the boat just to rock the boat. Maybe that's just my advancing years being the youngest person on this podcast. And I don't need to just kind of put my stamp on something. And, if it works, it works. As a slight tangent, my roommates and I were watching the new Last of Us series last night, and we were just talking about how like a lesser creator would have just thrown everything out because they wanted to put their mark on it, and they thought that they were were the thing. And Craig Mazin is, I think one of the best TV writers going right now. And if you're not super into TV, he also did the Chernobyl series, which on HBO.
Oh, that was
incredible.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
He also has had a very long running podcast with John August since the beginning of podcasts, basically. But anyway, in his hands, he's taking what worked from the game and not messing with it. He's like, no, this clearly works. There's a reason why this works. Let's just build on this. And, what do we need to change to make it work for TV, and what should we keep because it's the why people like this series or not series, of these games. And that's kind of how I look at this, where it's like this is working. We don't need to just radically change things because just to change them, I don't have that kind of ego. I do, but not in this case. But I think the only two changes that I would probably do, just because through my career, I've found following my interests has done me pretty well. And so I have kind of less interest in the super cheap stuff, and I have less interest in the super expensive stuff. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to do those things.
Yeah.
But I just have kind of a more interest in, what's something good that someone wouldn't mind buying or maybe saving up a little bit for, that's going to give them a better experience than some more mainstream. If someone wants to upgrade from their AirPods, that's not a heavy lift. You could certainly find lots of those. Okay, what do those look like? What does that mean? And then, like I always said at home theater too, or all throughout my reviewing years, it's like every once in a while you got to review a Ferrari. Car and Driver does. It's not all Camrys. You need that perspective of like, all right, well, what can you get? What just went up on the site recently was your Focal review, and those are like $5,000. But that's important. We should have stuff like that to say, hey, what does that sound like? Is there a reason something like that exists? I think you made a pretty compelling case that there is a good reason for that to exist. So, I still like doing a variation of a variety of things, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Jeff, one thing I'm curious about, in addition to being a very well-known electronics writer, and also the international best-selling author of the unfinished Undersea trilogy, with the third book coming soon, one hopes. You're also quite an extensive traveler and travel writer. We joked years ago that we were going to try to write an API to basically just follow your Twitter account and make a website called "Where in the World is Jeff Morrison?" So I'm wondering, there's a point to all of this, I promise. I'm wondering if maybe the fact that you travel so extensively and you spend months and months and months away from home on the road is going to influence how you cover headphones, and if so, in what ways?
Yes, thank you for letting me talk about my favorite subject, my traveling. So yes, and to perfectly boast about it, last year I hit 60 countries and 50 states, not all at once, but cumulative. And this year, I'm certainly going to do a few more, but I'm not going to be doing before COVID. It was half the year or so I was traveling. We'll see what this year looks like, but I've recently built out a camper van, so I'm going to do more, US based trips and national parks and stuff. But to answer your question more directly, that's a huge part of, headphones for me, is how they work kind of wandering around. And I've gotten a lot of flack from at least 50% of the people on this podcast of using the B&W C5 Series 2s, which are some of my favorite headphones ever. And they are extremely bass heavy, and I don't deny that. But they are also very comfortable. They let in just enough ambient sound so that I'm not afraid that I'm going to get run over stepping out into the street. And they don't fall out of my ears when I'm walking around or hiking. So that's an important part to me. And a lot of the, especially true wireless headphones, earbuds, they're just not that great for moving around. And even some of the ones that I've done for SoundStage recently, where the cable just makes an incredible racket. How do you walk around with something like that? Is this something that's made to just listen to at a desk? That's fine. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of people would want something that is a little more something you can use while you're moving around. And so that is going to, impact some of the coverages. Definitely is, what's a good noise canceling headphone for, a certain price, or, but more importantly, what's a good noise canceling headphone that has good sound? That's also important because, what's the best noise canceling headphone? Well, it's going to be the Bose, but they sound okay. Can we take a slight hit in noise canceling and get some better sound quality? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? And then also, what is it, how do you travel, especially internationally, if you want to listen to music all the time, which I certainly do? What does that look like? And there are ways to do that are fairly easy without running up, hundreds of dollars worth of data charges because you're listening to Spotify for a week and wherever.
Never even thought of that.
Yeah. I'd love to get in. This is a bit of a stretch, but we'll see. But I'd love to get in. Sony just released some new Walkmans, and they're pricey, but they're super cool looking. And they hold tons of music. And I traveled with an iPod for years after that became, people was like, why do you still have an iPod? I was like, I got 100 gigs worth of music on there. Why do you think I have an iPod?
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that, I've even talking to other tech people about that aspect, and they're like, well, I just listen to everything on Spotify. It's like, that's cool. So what do you do when you don't have data? Because you're not going to always have data. Even my phone, which works everywhere in the world, doesn't always have data that I can use because some places just don't. You're in the middle of a national park on a nice hike, and all of a sudden you lose signal, and now you're walking in silence. Oh, the horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I kind of came to that realization the last road trip that Brent and I went on, which was Brent, we went through Joshua Tree and Death Valley.
Death Valley. That's right. In 2020.
That was right before COVID hit. And I think that was the first time that I became like consciously aware of the fact that having most of my music in the cloud was now a detriment.
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
We would be completely off grid for, a day at a time. And, thank goodness the conversation was interesting because there wasn't much we could do for music in terms of streaming. So yeah, it's a really important point. I don't think enough people talk about. So
yeah, I think the people who kind of assume that it's always going to be there typically live in cities where they're never without data or Wi-Fi. And it's like, that's cool, but that's not the case for, like you said, a lot of national parks, but also even just rural areas in general, I think are greatly overlooked by the average tech journalist. I've written, slight tangent again, but like I've written about trying to get 4K over the air and trying to get 4K or any sort of TV to different places. And there's always a pushback amongst certain people who are like, well, why don't they just get, cable, or, why don't they just get better internet? Like, what does it matter if they're streaming? They just stream this stuff. And I'm like, well, but a lot of places that maybe they're having to spend $100 to get 5 megabytes download. That's not everywhere. And obviously that's a smaller percentage of the population, but these things, having empathy is certainly an important thing. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
That's a good, now that I think about it, that's a great angle, like mobile, high quality sound, but mobile, because people review these things in their homes. Let's face it.
Yeah.
They very rarely review them on the go. And that's been something that I've kind of realized in my review of noise canceling headphones, is that I see so many people using these things, but and I do fly, and I always bring noise canceling headphones with me, but I don't have, if you have a pair of noise canceling headphones and you're, traveling once a month or twice a month or something, you're going to find the problems that like I wouldn't, traveling with them once for one flight, because I usually bring like a couple pairs so that I have a little flight time with both of them. And different areas in the airplane cabin will be different. And maybe a 2-hour flight is very different from a 6-hour flight in terms of comfort, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, one of the things, so I reviewed the Bose, the latest earbuds for SoundStage a couple months ago. And the noise canceling is, without question, incredible. I mean, I've never heard anything like it. And I've been covering these things for a long time. But what, and when I finish a review, I like to look around at what other people have said about the product, just to make sure I didn't miss anything, and just like, oh, that's an interesting angle, whatever. And I don't think I found any other review, at least not that I saw, that mentioned the fact that they don't have any way to connect analog. So if these things are going to be used on an airplane, which presumably they will be, you can't connect to the in-flight entertainment without some other product that Bose doesn't, as far as I know, sell.
Yeah.
Well, then how do I watch the crappy movies that are on the plane? That means you have to bring your own content, and that's okay, I guess. But that's something that people need to know when they're buying these things, that they're not getting on a 6 to 10 or 12-hour flight and go, oh wait, I can't use the noise canceling headphones and watch this movie. Like,
that's a good point, especially since in-flight entertainment is way better than it was 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, much better.
I mean,
I only fly business class, so
well.
Hey man, credit cards with miles, they work wonders.
Well, I use my miles for, I don't know, something else, buying ukuleles on Amazon.
Nice. Very on brand.
Yeah. So, what else can we ask you in terms of the have they figured out who's going to do measurements yet?
They have not. There's a couple things in the works. We're kind of figuring out logistics for that. It's looking like it's probably just going to be me sending up chunks of headphones, and then someone else will pick them up to do the measurements. But that's still kind of in the works. There might be like a short period of time where there isn't measurements, but we're hoping that'll minimize that amount of time.
They are committed to that, right? Meaning Doug Schneider.
Yeah, Doug is 100% committed to keeping the measure. And I want that too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the home theater days, or, our sister magazine, Stereophile. I think you mentioned John Atkinson earlier. But I thought he always had a very good angle on this. And I think both you and I have done something similar where, the reviewer can kind of say what they want to in the text of the subjective side of things, but it's important to kind of, have the objective side of things. And I certainly have done that with video measurements for a long time. And like you do with audio measurements. So it's important. I think we need to have it. Figuring out the logistics of it is in the works. That's all I can say about that.
I'm looking forward to it because there's limitations in my measurement gear, right? And let's just say headphone measurements are really expensive to do because like the minimum piece, like there's a really cheap thing you can buy from Mini DSP that costs $300 and it has very limited utility. It is very amateurish, but to get into professional gear, $8,000 basically. And it goes up from there. If you want a full like head and torso system, you're getting into I think $25,000 or something. So it's a big investment, and someone's going to have to make a big investment, as I did, 10 years ago. And however, my audio analyzer is it's kind of out of date, and It's been upgraded. I've upgraded it several times at considerable expense, but it's kind of at the end of its rope. Still really good for speakers, but not really, headphones. For Bluetooth, it's really dicey. And I've said that in the measurements. I've said, hey, you know what? I because of my analyzer, I can't measure this thing, and and there's cases where something freaks out in the system and I just can't get a measurement out of the headphones. I don't know why. I spend hours and hours and hours trying to get it to work. But however, I believe, if I remember correctly, that the system they're talking about, they would switch over to an Audio Precision, which should do, according to Audio Precision's marketing and the demos that I've seen at some seminars, they can handle the latency of Bluetooth a lot better than my Audiomatica Clio can. So that could be a pretty giant upgrade in the measurements. So Stay tuned, readers. This could be really good.
Yeah. And, we'll certainly talk about it when it happens.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up.
I think we should just say thank you to Jeff for joining us. And Jeff, I'm really looking forward to reading your stuff on SoundStage
Me
Solo.
too.
It's I think you're going to bring a different perspective, and I think all of the travel stuff is going to be interesting and fascinating, and I think maybe it's hopefully going to make people, I don't know, think about all of this stuff a little differently. So we'll see.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be part of the team.
Thanks for coming on, Jeff.
Man.
Thanks, guys.
So we're gonna take a quick break, listen to some music, get a little bit of water, and then we will we'll be back to wrap up this this first season of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast.
Yay. And we're back. This is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Brent Butterworth.
And I am Dennis Berger.
And we are here to wrap up Season 1. Even though this is not going to be one of those podcasts where they do like a season and then they mess around for a few months. This is going to be a continuing effort. It's going to continue on. Season 2 starts, 2 weeks after you hear this.
Well, maybe not exactly 2 weeks, but
maybe
sometime
not 2
in
weeks,
February.
But somewhere in February, you'll hear the next edition. But we're saying it's Season 1 because we are going through some big changes. As we talked about, I am leaving SoundStage to go work full time for Wirecutter. I already have. I'm just wrapping up loose ends right now. And Dennis, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to keep producing the Soundcast. I'm going to be engineering it. I'm going to be recording it. I'm going to be mixing and mastering it. But I just don't have any interest whatsoever in being a podcast host without you. We work so well together, and you're one of my best friends in the world. You've been one of my best friends in the world for a very, very long time, and I just don't have any interest in doing it without you. So,
right back at you.
Yeah. So,
and but as David Chesky one time said, he said to somebody in the industry, he says, "Love you," and he says, "I mean it."
Nice. But yeah, but as we have intimated here, though, we actually do have a little bit of insight into where the podcast is going to go from here. We didn't when we recorded the last episode, but we've sort of been privy to the plans of Doug Schneider, the founder and guiding light of SoundStage, about what he is going to do with Season 2 going forward. And we're not going to spoil that, but I think it's really interesting, and I think the podcast is going to take it's going to head in a bit more of an educational direction, which I think is interesting. And I think
like Schoolhouse Rock,
maybe with a little less rhyming, but,
little songs.
Yeah, but I think there's going to be much more of an educational element and much less of a ranty element. Maybe a little less jazz music, but I think it's really interesting, and I can't wait to listen to it. I think it's going to be really great. So
cool.
I hope
well,
so.
I'm
Anyway.
Looking forward to listening to it too.
Yeah, but
and I would like to take this chance though to thank all of the people who've listened to us over the last year,
mm-hmm.
and to thank all the. I mean, we've been pretty hard hitting in this podcast a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Not least of all in this episode.
Yeah,
and I just want to say, I haven't gotten any nasty emails from anybody, so that was nice.
Well, we did get some nasty emails for getting our dates wrong a couple of times.
True. Well, yeah, but it was that sort of stuff. But it was none of the people we criticized kind of came back at us.
Yeah,
maybe they did on their own podcasts, but I don't know. I haven't heard it, and so I thank them for their good naturedness.
Yeah,
and if they want to lob some criticism at us, hey, bring it on, man. Keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
It's like when we start to accept things in audio, they're like, oh yeah, this is true. That's when we start to get in trouble. And that's when we start to waste tons of money and buy crap that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up this season 1 grand finale, do you want to do some credits one last time, Brent?
Let's do some credits. I'm proud to say this has been a Butterburger production.
Absolutely. And this has been a presentation of the SoundStage Network, which, as we mentioned in the intro, is a collection of 9 microsites that cover all sorts of topics on audio, from solo, which is about headphones and will continue to be. Access is about very affordable, high value gear. We have sites that cover ultra high end. We have sites that focus on, the software, the movies, and the music that we all play on our systems. And so check out soundstage.com. You'll see all sorts of content there. Who's doing the music this time, man?
The music's going to be a combination of me and some of my pals like Dan Grande and Ron Zeiger.
Excellent.
And also we'll throw a piece from Terry Landry in here, our good friend, who has and you'll know Terry's stuff because it is far more sophisticated than mine. Mine is the simplistic showboaty kind of stuff. Terry's has like lots of fancy chords in it, which I don't understand, but I'd love to listen to.
Well, I love them both. So
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate it. This is
okay.
This last year has been the hardest of my life, and I have to say the doing the podcast with you, Brent, has gotten me through some really, really rough times. So I appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you. And it's gotten me through through a move and through all sorts of adjusting to my new surroundings here and all sorts of stuff.
I can't wait to come visit you as soon as I'm able to fly, man.
It's going to be incredible.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.